Okay, so we're going to continue our Sex as an Invisible Contract series. Thank you so much for your comments and your messages. I've looked at them. Just bear with me. I'm new to YouTube as a platform, so I'm getting used to the functions and features. I do want to make sure this is a space that is well moderated. I'm not going to use the word safe space, okay, because I've been a practitioner, a facilitator for many years, and I don't believe actually that safe spaces online exist on the World Wide Web. Okay, I think people make very valiant attempts to create them, but I think on a public platform like this, it's actually very difficult. And so what I'm going to be thinking about is obviously how we moderate the comment sections in a responsible way. And so just bear with me. I'm getting to grips with the functions and features that would allow me to do that. The other thing, obviously, I want to say up from the rip that there will be references, of course, in today's episode or session to sexual assault, violence, and coercion. So listener discretion is advised, okay? And also, before we get into the main part of our session, I am well and safe, okay? So I think it's really important for you to realize that I am well and safe. I've had therapy. I'm years out, as it were, from some of the events that I referred to in my last episode. Okay, I'm well and safe, but I encourage you to also take good care of yourself. And whether that's stopping and pausing this episode as and when you need to, whether it's seeking professional qualified assistance, okay, take good care of yourself, because this entire series about invisible contracts, this is my work, okay? And when we talk about invisible contracts, don't worry, I will be recording another episode where I talk about what invisible contracts are, because I've recognized for those of you who are joining me here on YouTube, you do not necessarily know about the backlog of podcast episodes that exist where I have covered invisible contracts, but I think it's time for a refresh on what I mean by invisible contracts and the framework itself. That will be coming up soon, okay? So don't worry about that. But my point is that my work really sits in the gap between what women are taught and told is true, okay, about safety, belonging, and acceptance, and what our actual lived realities are. That is what an invisible contract speaks to. And it's in that gap, which is complex, which is nuanced, which is often painful, confronting. And what happens when we notice an invisible contract, we identify it. What happens when we choose to break it? Because inevitably, the breaking of an invisible contract often requires us to face and navigate punishment. Okay, so that's what this work is really about. And sex is one of the biggest invisible contracts in all its guises that governs women's lives. And that is why it has been a key part of this work that I do. And 20 odd years ago, I'm 37 now, well, it's less than 20 years, just under 20 years, my dissertation at university, I studied law at uni, and my dissertation was on a particular piece of legislation that came in that impacted the sex work industry. So I've always been interested in these pieces, sex and women, and the invisible contracts that govern women's lives in relation to that. So that is really some context for you before we get into the heart of our conversation today. Okay. Why does this conversation matter, and what are we going to be talking about today? First of all, what are we going to be talking about? Let's start there. I'm going to be talking with you about the 5 injuries, okay, that often follow sexual violence, coercion, assault. And the reason why this is really important is that first of all, right now in the UK, there's a case that is really garnering a lot of media attention, and rightly so. 3 young boys were convicted of rape. There was clear evidence of their crime, and the judge made a decision and announced it verbally that he would not be giving them a custodial sentence. And that, of course, has garnered quite a bit of media attention. And it's directly related to why I feel this work is so important. And what I want to say here is that when we talk about sex, and of course, at the moment we are talking about really the more negative, dark sides of sexual activity, of sexuality, this work also is about illuminating the beautiful aspects of sex. We will get there. So don't worry, we will get there. But at the moment, we're really focused on these invisible contracts that as I say, are unfortunately quite dark. Okay. And so this conversation is timely and it is important because what we see from a system of power time and time and time again, and we then see it reflected in society, is that people really have no idea about the lifelong consequences and impact for victims and survivors. They have no idea. And this is one of the reasons why we see a lot of callous, throwaway commentary. We see people who are really uncomfortable with sitting with the gravity of these experiences, and so they want to make jokes about it. I saw in some of the comments on the last video, people saying that this is feminism, woke feminism. One individual even said that, well, this is heterosexuality. If you don't like heterosexuality, don't engage with it. What's interesting is that people's inability, sometimes it is it's a mixture of lacking in humanity, lacking a certain level of consciousness. Okay, some other people are just not intelligent enough to engage in the conversation. Then you have the trolls, and then you have people who are ignorant. Okay, and so with all of these things mixed, what happens is that we are very desensitized as a society. Okay, we are very desensitized, and we also sanitize these conversations to make other people feel more comfortable. But the overall impact of that on a victim and survivor, which can be any gender, is that we dismiss them, we denigrate, we deny, we diminish their lived reality. Okay, we question them as to whether or not they're telling the truth, whether or not they are reliable narrators, not only of the original event, mind you, but also of the ongoing impact that they are suffering and enduring. And I use these words deliberately because that is exactly what it is. And quite often, and this is why I don't take this work lightly, because I've gotten to a certain point in my own personal and professional life, I can talk about these things. I have the capacity on a nervous system level to talk about them. And when I see comments like those silly comments under the last video, whether it's on TikTok or this app, it's water off a duck's back. Okay, because I've been through a judicial process, where supposedly the Almighty God was judging me as to whether or not I was truthful about what happened with me. And when you've come through something like that ruptures you on an identity level, and then you've done the work, I've done the therapy, I lived the reality, it's water off a duck's back. But that's why for me it's such a privilege. I understand the privilege that I possess because I can talk about these things, okay? And I don't speak for all victims and survivors. That's not what I'm saying. Each experience has its own uniqueness. But what I am saying is that in a small way, I have the nervous system capacity to talk about some of the consequences and the impact and the injuries, because it is an injury to the soul. It is. And it's an injury to humanity. The problem is systems of power, and then just people out in society do not understand the gravity of these things when they happen and the way it impacts not only an individual's peace of mind, mental health, bodily safety, their nervous system, okay, the trajectory sometimes of their life. It does not escape me that it is a privilege that I am still alive, one, and two, that I have at the moment the capacity to love, the capacity to be around people, the capacity to have some patience when I see people say ignorant, foolish, and sometimes deplorable things about victims and survivors. One of the things that annoys me greatly is when people completely dismiss and say that most women are lying, that these things are rare, because they are absolutely not. You can check the statistics and the research. And I'm not an academic. I'm not an activist, okay? I'm not a professor. So one thing that I do not allow people to kind of corner me on is always constantly reciting statistics and research, because when it comes to this topic, lived reality is data, and it absolutely matters, especially when you have millions of women and children sharing. And that is where the invisible contract framework really comes to life, because we don't ignore quantitative evidence. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is what is ignored commonly on a everyday level is lived reality, the lived reality of women. And that is what we're here to explore. And so, because I know that we sanitize these conversations to make people feel more comfortable so that they do not have to confront the reality, but also as a society, we are desensitized. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. That's an entirely different conversation. And I'm very conscious that we want to focus on these 5 injuries, okay, that people are often experiencing after the initial incident, if it is indeed even one incident, okay? So the 5 injuries we're going to go over today is psychological injury, nervous system injury, bodily injury, social injury, and identity injury, okay? That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the biggest invisible contract that really relates to what we're talking about today is that women are expected, women, children, victims, we're expected to remain invisible. The suffering must remain invisible so that everyone else can stay comfortable. Okay? And so that's why it causes such a rupture when women talk about their experiences. The last video that I did, all I did was talk about what it's like to be in the same space physically and energetically as a man that's aroused, one. And then all I did was talk about what it is like or was like for me being in the same space as a man that had decided his intent was to seek release at the expense of my body. And wow. Okay. Wow. On one hand, that brought out a number of women who emailed and messaged me about their experiences. And on the other hand, it brought out people who outright denied. Okay. And remember, it is a nuanced piece. It's complex. I did not demonize men, all men. That's not what I said. That's not what I meant. That's not what we discussed. And yet that is what some individuals who have an inability, for whatever reason, to sit with that complexity, that's what they rush towards. All right. That's why I believe it's important that we talk very clearly about the impact this has on victims and survivors, specifically of non-consensual. Okay, that's what we're talking about today. Because I believe that when you don't understand the impact, or when you are allowed to ignore it, it makes it easier for you to be dismissive, callous, etc., and turn your back on that pain that somebody else might well be experiencing. That's what I believe. Okay, and that's what I observe to be true. Right, the psychological injury. And before we get into this, the last thing I do want to say before we get into this section is that, as I say, each experience is unique. Okay, so I'm giving an overview of the different layers, I think, of injury, okay, that stay with you. But of course, there are going to be people with different experiences, and that is okay. That is valid. I'm only going to speak to some of them. So when you think about the psychological injury, that's about what happens to the mind. Okay, some of the common things are confusion, shock, self-doubt, shame. Shame is a massive one. Self-blame, intrusive memories and thoughts, rumination, going over and over and over what happened, running through bit by bit. What did I miss? What could I have not done? What could I have said better, done differently? These things alone, they can absolutely wear you out. Yeah, the psychological injury can wear you out. And what happens a lot of the time is that these things like confusion, shock, doubt, there's a numbing that can happen sometimes. Okay, because I remember for me, I was completely numb. I can't tell you how I got home that day. I know I must have gotten on the train, but I don't remember that part of my day vividly. I do now, but at the time I couldn't remember that part of the day. Do you see where I'm coming from? There's a numbing. My mind was completely blank at times in the next 2-3 days, etc. Completely blank. And it is that blankness of mind that meant that I went to the elders in my congregation without really thinking about whether it was safe for me to do so. Okay? I did what I was told. okay, because I was blank-minded and numb. And the thing is that, you know, when you have experienced something similar, sometimes you're already questioning yourself, okay? And so therefore, when you are dismissed by other people, it just compounds the existing psychological distress and confusion, okay? And when you face skepticism and cynicism from other people, whether it's people you know very well that you may have disclosed this to, or indeed strangers. I can only imagine for people whose experiences become publicly known on the World Wide Web, and you have complete strangers speculating, questioning your character, whether you're telling the truth. It's a second injury. I can honestly tell you my experience of going through a judicial inside the former religion I was a part of was more traumatic than the original incident. It really was. It was more traumatic, more humiliating, more degrading. Because this is something that people don't realize. It can be a second injury if you disclose something, if it becomes known, and all you're faced with is skepticism, cynicism, being doubted, being questioned, being judged. Okay? And we'll talk about the other type of injury and how this leads into identity injury quite often. Okay? Because what can happen is that it puts you in a situation where you feel like you have to prove your pain to deserve compassion. You have to prove that you are the perfect innocent victim to deserve any compassion from anyone else. For me, I had to switch from processing what had happened to me to proving to a group of men that I was clean enough, that I wasn't deserving, that I didn't ask for it, it wasn't my fault. Now that didn't work anyway, right? Because it was their decision to make. But I had to switch. So I didn't process what had actually happened to me for years, because all of my focus and energy, the little that I had, became refocused on proving that I was deserving of dignity and some compassion. Okay? Never received it from them, but that's where my energy shifted to. Okay? You often then may feel like you have to convince people that what happened to you was real. There were times where I used to think, did I fall asleep? Maybe I fell asleep. It has to be. Because according to them, this didn't happen. It wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't what I know logically in my head. And even my body tells me this was wrong. That something happened to me. Someone did something to me. But apparently, according to everybody else, that's not the way it is. This is normal. I've misunderstood. I've misinterpreted. And so you can slip into a mindset where you're trying to convince people, often people that say that they like you, say that they respect you and care about you and love you, but then you're in this place where you're having to convince people that what happened was actually real and it's not in your head. I actually went through a period of time where I thought I must have a serious issue mentally up here. Maybe I'm lying. Genuinely, I went through long periods of time where I thought I fell asleep and forgot, or I have some serious issues. The issues I have are huge, because why would I wake up one day and suddenly, why would I do that? So there's often a psychological injury. Now, bear in mind, we've only got so much time together in this session, okay? But so I can't go into all the details of each. I'm giving you an overview. The next injury is the nervous system injury. What happens to your sense of safety? Your core internal sense of safety. Okay, some of the common things are hypervigilance. I didn't sleep for years, by the way, not properly. I didn't sleep for years. Anxiety, freeze responses, dissociation, panic, difficulty relaxing and resting, difficulty trusting your instincts. Because the minute you can't trust your instincts as a woman, you're in trouble. Because your instincts are part of what we use to keep us safe. But then when your safety has been threatened and breached, and then when you're told that actually you're lying and that didn't really happen to you, can you trust yourself? That was one of the deepest injuries for me, is being in a place for a few years where I felt like I couldn't trust myself. In fact, it impacted me on a professional level, because my job obviously is an external expert. I provide consultancy to my corporate clients. And suddenly, even when my corporate clients sometimes would bring me in on a project, I'll be sitting in a C-suite, sitting with a CEO, and they're asking me for my expertise. Honestly, in the back of my mind, sometimes I think, well, you can't listen to me. Why are you asking me? Because apparently this thing that happened didn't really happen. No one believed me. So there must be something wrong with me. How can you trust me? I don't trust me. I mean, how did I end up in a situation where someone could harm me like that? Me. You know, on a Tuesday, I'm an expert being asked for my expertise, and it provides value and it enables transformation. And on a Wednesday, somebody's harming me, but nobody believes me. So I must be stupid. Even on a personal level, you know, I'm the eldest daughter, eldest granddaughter. I've always been responsible, sensible. People will look to me. And for a very long time, I was like, don't ask me any questions. Don't ask me for advice. People would ask me, how do I do this? What do you think? I genuinely, not that I even had the capacity and the bandwidth, but deep down, I questioned whether I could even be trusted. Because how on earth did I end up in a situation where that happened to me, number one? And number two, no one believed me. So I must be the wrong one, because everybody else is very clear that I'm the one who's misinterpreted this, that I am the one who sinned. Everybody else is clear that I'm the one that is unclean. So how can I be trusted? So it's not just about your memory here. It becomes embodied, right? Your body continues to respond long after the events. Okay. Safety can become very difficult to access, very difficult to create, very difficult to truly be present in. And like I say, for me, my intellect is really important to me, as is my integrity. We'll talk about the identity injury in a moment. And so the nervous system injury was also impacting those other things for me as well, because the world did not feel safe. There were times I've always lived alone from the moment I moved out, of course, of my childhood home. I didn't want to open the front door. Sometimes I'd need a workman to come round to do something, or a parcel was being dropped off and I would shout through the door for them to leave it there. Because in my mind, I used to think to myself, if something happens to me again, no one's going to believe me. I'll be on my own. Because it's a pain that you live with alone. And so it affected everything. I'll never forget, I used to run a coffee shop, and we had a lot of workmen come in when we were setting the shop up. And one of the workmen, I think it was for the tiles or something like that. So he came into the shop, and our shop was located inside a shopping center. So it was a little bit of a trek to get to the car parks. And so he came in and told me a bit about how it's going to work, And then he was like, oh, he's left his sample book in his car in the car park. Now, years before that, I would have thought nothing of it. I would have just walked with him to the car park and looked at the swatches, because this is the town centre. I grew up in that area. I've been walking around there my entire life. I could not do it because, again, not because I thought he was a perpetrator, because I thought, well, if something happens, I'm going to be blamed again and nobody will believe me. And I didn't feel safe enough to do that, right? And so these are just small examples, okay? Because you start to doubt your own perception. Because if you're being told by other people, especially if it's people who say that they care about you, say that they respect you, but they're telling you that you're a liar. That's essentially what people are doing, is saying to you, you're a liar. You are not truthful, and therefore you cannot be trusted. And so you start to distrust your own perception and judgment, because everybody else got to be right? Because apparently when these things happen, it only happens to stupid people. Because everybody else apparently is a master mind reader. They're a jujitsu expert. Everybody else apparently can detect a predator from a mile off. You're the idiot because you didn't see it coming. And if you did see it coming, you didn't do enough to prevent it. I'll never forget when the elders asked me, would you agree that you gave in easily? So the nervous system injury. The next injury for me that I identified was the bodily injury. Okay, your relationship with your body is impacted. It certainly did mine. I didn't even look at myself much in the mirror. I'd look in the mirror to make sure I looked clean and tidy and presentable before leaving the house, but I didn't really see my body. I did not feel at home inside of my body at all. Okay, so you can feel often very disconnected from your body. You can feel contaminated. You see, that wording that is used in my former religion, are you clean enough to remain in the congregation? So there's this idea that you're soiled, that you are contaminated, that you are polluted. Okay, I didn't trust my own body for many reasons. And if you do your research on these things, I didn't trust my own body. I had difficulty, obviously, experiencing pleasure on any level. And see, when we talk about pleasure, pleasure is sensory. It's not just about sexual pleasure necessarily. It's about, I didn't have feelings for many years even. I couldn't tell you what I was feeling. I could tell you what I think about something, but not what I was feeling. I couldn't access feeling in my body, right? And so this is often overlooked because what happens is society focuses on the event itself, if they even acknowledge it happened, right? Little attention is paid to the survivor's ongoing bodily experiences, right? And here's the thing, even pain, the pain in the incident is pain that I didn't forget for a very long time. My body remembered that pain. My body remembered that pain. Even though it may not be happening in this moment, my body would remember the pain, the physical pain, the way my eyes hurt, the way my skin hurt, the way the pain rippled through my body. Yeah, the way I lost my breath, I felt winded because of the pain. Your body remembers that. Yeah, and sometimes you can feel as if your body betrays you, that the body betrayed you. There's so many things. It's so complex, and people are living with this, by the way. People are living with this and having to process it and work it through and understand themselves. Okay. The next one is the social injury. So what happens to your relationship with other people? You lose trust. There's isolation, difficulty forming new relationships, new friendships, fear of being judged again. Fear of not being believed again. There's so many people who, if they do go on to try and have other relationships with people, new relationships with people, do they disclose? Don't they disclose? If you disclose, depends upon that person's reaction. And then you have to judge their reaction. Then do you have to be understanding and gracious of their reaction, even though really it's your pain and your experience? Really challenging. Really challenging. Okay? And so it does change relationships. Some people, they become very angry, very closed down, shut down, and that can impact friendships and relationships. Some people are vulnerable during those times, and maybe they are attracted to people who are bad actors. Maybe they overly disclose, they overly trust too early. It has multiple effects on us, this kind of thing, okay? And the thing is, it's not just your relationship with other people, there's also institutional betrayal. Because I had a complete crisis in terms of the religion I was a part of, the religion that I had been assured and told was safe, that focused on fact and truth, that respected human beings. Everything I'd ever known about my religion, it just came down like a deck of cards. And so I was having a complete crisis. I could not trust the institution, the organization, the religion itself. Religion is a system of power. And my goodness, when these things happen, does it function like a system of power? It's not interested in your individual dignity. And it's also not interested really in the truth of what happened. It's about, keeping their power at that point. Okay. And so family systems, your family might not be supportive. Your family might not believe you. Your family, sometimes they don't know how to help you as well. There's also that. They may not know how to do it, but you can feel betrayed by family. You can feel betrayed by religious systems. Okay, you can feel betrayed and experience betrayal from the legal system, which takes us back to that UK case. Yeah, those young girls have gone through an arduous process, a exposing process, a punishing process. There was evidence, and when they get to that supposed finish line, okay, the legal system betrays them. Yeah. And so this is why it's so important for us to understand that the way we talk about these things, the way we deal with these things, the suffering becomes secondary. Okay. And your future as a human being matters very little to people. The impact on your life is negotiable. No one really understands and can grasp the gravity of it. And so one of the invisible contracts you experience in that moment is that I must accept being treated as less important, essentially, less important than how other people feel and perceive this situation to be. And the last injury we'll cover in this session is the identity injury. So this is what happens to the self. I alluded to this earlier. Who am I now? Am I damaged? Am I still worthy? Am I safe? Will I ever be safe again? Will I ever feel safety again? Am I still whole? Yeah, it's a very deep injury on an identity level. Like I said, for me, it trickled into the way I showed up professionally, because I thought, you can't rely on me. You can't rely on me. And when friends and family would ask me my advice about things, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I'm an idiot, because I ended up being prey to someone. And then on top of that, I wasn't believed. And I went and, in my own religion that I thought was the truth, was real. They also didn't believe me. They just reinforced what the original perpetrator did. So it affected me on an identity level professionally. And I can tell you that my earnings went down because of that. All right. And so it affects how people understand themselves. It affects your future decision making. My goodness, some of the decisions I made in the subsequent 18 months, 2 years, if I was in the frame of mind I'm in now, I wouldn't have made those decisions. I would not have made those decisions at all. Okay. It affects your relationships, of course, your personal agency. Okay. And what I have found has been important to reclaim my identity is to refuse to define myself by what happened, and also refuse to define myself by how other people judged me. Okay. I don't outsource my worth and my sense of self, and I reclaimed complete authorship of my life. This is why I talk about being unpunishable. I do not allow other people to project, assert, insert any kind of punishment on who I am. I am the one in charge of how I feel and how I think of myself. Because, for me, I was in a religion where my entire identity was in my faith and my worship to a God. And when you're sitting in front of a group of men telling you that they are ordained by God to decide whether or not you are raped, and that they are ordained by God to decide if you are clean enough to be in his congregation, that changes things massively. Because in that moment, I realized I have outsourced my authority over who I am, how I see myself, and at the time, how God sees me. I had outsourced that to some imperfect human men who were telling me that they had the authority to do that they could tell me what happened to me and who I was in God's eyes as a result. I had to extract myself, and I had to pull back that authority. I had to take it all the way back. Okay, and so there's a deep identity injury. Now, I've only just shared very briefly how it's affected me, how these types of injuries have affected me. It's not going to be the same for everyone. It's going to be very different. Not everybody's religious, etc., etc. So take this or not as you will. But these are some of the injuries that you are living with as a survivor, okay, that people sometimes cannot even grasp. And so, when you have a system of power like the legal system, which refuses, because it has an opportunity to, and it has all the evidence it needs, but it refuses to even acknowledge the event itself with appropriate consequence, those survivors are left yeah, with all of these injuries to have to process and learn how to live with by themselves. And this is why when I talk about the importance of being an unpunishable woman, it starts from within, because we cannot rely on systems of power. We can't rely on systems of power to validate us, affirm the pain, affirm the injuries. No, we have to find ways of doing that ourselves. We have to. And it requires you quite often, as I say, to reclaim that authority, the authority that as girls and women we're taught belongs externally, that we don't have authority over what we think and who we are, but we do. And it is possible. It absolutely is possible to reclaim your authority. So look, in sum total, I guess my overall point with this one is that, you know, often sexual violence is not only about what's happened in a single moment, okay? It's about what survivors are left to carry afterwards. And until society starts to understand the psychological, the nervous system, the bodily, the social, the identity injuries that follow, then that's why systems of power can continue to dismiss and deny. Okay, that is why even just the general population does not understand the true cost of these experiences. And that's it for this session. So as I said, look after yourself. I understand that what we've discussed is rather heavy. I'm really interested in kind of hearing your thoughts about what we've been discussing today. Like I say, subscribe to the Substack because I talk about this in more nuance. There's a long form essay on there about this. So do join us over on Substack, and I'll see you next time.